All right, guys. So let's pick up right where we left off. Um, all right. So just to explain this Anaconda plan a little bit more in depth, let me go to this next slide. So it was designed by our ancient general at this point. This guy's name was Winfield Scott. He was super old, but he was beloved by the people. He'd been in the military for almost entire life. And he was using what we consider now a pretty antiquated style of fighting to try to defeat the South. The plan was blockade Confederate ports, ruin their economy, take the Mississippi, split the South in two, divide and conquer, and then eventually capture the capital of Richmond, okay? Which you have to keep in mind was only about 50 miles away from the federal capital at Washington, D.C. So the assumption here was that the war would go quickly. And both sides actually believed generally that the war would go quickly. Either the South would give in, come back with their tail between their legs, or from the South's perspective, the North would realize what an arduous campaign this would be and give up right away. Both sides, of course, were brutally wrong. All right, so going back to the advantages and disadvantages, these are just all of the things that I had alluded to before. But something I want to make sure I put in the back of your mind is this issue of the draft. This is the first time that the United States is going to have to issue the draft as a country. So we had to do certain bits of conscription during the Revolution, but not as much as you would think. During the Civil War, that's going to be totally different. Both the North and the South are going to have to conscript soldiers to fight. In the North, that's eventually going to lead to a lot of draft riots, especially when Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. People in the North, some of them, are not convinced that they should be forced to fight for a war to free a bunch of people that they care nothing about. And then, of course, in the South, if you think about it, the cause of the war was independence and freedom. And then here's this new government espousing independence and freedom, telling you that you have to go fight a war for them, or else you're not a member of their society and you could be penalized for it. All right, so this is Winfield Scott. This is the guy I was referring to earlier. Old fuss and feathers, super old, 74 years old on the eve of the war. So you're going to see he's going to be somebody that's replaced relatively quickly. And the Union is going to struggle for the entirety of the war to really come up with good officers to conduct the war. All right, so there's a political cartoon showcasing Scott's Anaconda plan. All right, so in the South, basically what they wanted, their cause was independence and to defend themselves. Now, of course, notice here I didn't put anything about slavery, but it goes without saying that slavery is the ultimate thing that most Southerners were looking to defend. So their ultimate goal was, in order to win, they just had to prolong the war to the point where Northerners would give up. They would say, this isn't worth it, let's sue for peace and give up. So it was defensive, but also offensive strategy. So they knew that they were going to be invaded. And General Lee, the guy who eventually takes over command of the Army of Northern Virginia, has to, at a certain point in the war, give up the defenses and move into invading the North to try to drive home to the Northerners that they should give up. And we'll talk about ultimately how that shaped the rest of the war. So the big advantages they had was, and this is an intangible thing, you can't put a number on this or put it in a graph, but their will to fight. The cause for them was very serious. To them, this was the Second American Revolution. They were fighting against a tyrannical government that was bossing them around, essentially. Okay? So they also had a pretty decent sized territory. If you look back at the maps, it's not roughly the same size as the United States. But remember, what the United States has to do is blockade all of that land. So it's very difficult. Disadvantages, they have less railroads, they have less physical goods to fight war, they have much less means in terms of actually producing war machines in order to fight as well. And this is the other important thing. They didn't have the means to collect taxes. Keep in mind, in the North, there's no income tax, there's sales tax, there's other types of tax systems that we really wouldn't recognize today, but in the South, they don't have any of that. There was definitely inflation in the North from funding the war, but in the South, it was much, much worse. We estimate that at the beginning of the war to the end, the value of Southern currency, of the Confederate dollar, inflated itself about 9,000%. All right, so with all this said and done, in class on Monday, we're going to tackle this question. Does Lincoln deserve the title the Great Emancipator? It's important because halfway through the war, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which changes the face of the war. And we have to tackle this really controversial and really complicated issue. President Obama himself has said that he doesn't consider Lincoln the great emancipator, but it's more complicated than I think President Obama referred to, and we'll look at that clip on Monday and debate it. All right, so I'll catch up with you guys in class on Monday, and we'll continue on from there. Thank you.